Memphis, Tennessee, August 1969. The spotlight blazed down on Elvis Presley as he stepped onto the stage of the International Hotel in Las Vegas. Behind him, three voices harmonized in perfect unity, the Sweet Inspirations. The crowd erupted as Elvis began, "That's All Right," his hips swaying to the rhythm that had captivated the world. But tonight, something was different. In the middle of his second song, Elvis paused. He turned around, facing his backup singers, and what happened next would change one woman's life forever. The king of rock and roll was about to crown someone else. Standing behind him was Cissy Houston, lead vocalist of the Sweet Inspirations, and a woman carrying dreams bigger than the small apartment she shared with her young daughter in Newark, New Jersey. Cissy had been singing backup for the biggest names in music, Aretha Franklin, Wilson Pickett, and now Elvis himself. But like so many talented women of her era, she remained in the shadows, her extraordinary voice serving others' stardom while her own potential lay dormant. She worked 3 jobs to make ends meet: backup singer by night, session musician by day, and church soloist on Sundays. Her daughter Whitney, just 6 years old, would often fall asleep to the sound of her mother's voice rehearsing in their tiny living room. This is the story of recognition, of how true talent, no matter how hidden, eventually finds its moment to shine. It's about mentorship, the power of established artists to lift others up rather than keep them down. Most importantly, it's about family legacy, and how one night in Las Vegas planted the seeds for a musical dynasty that would span generations. What Elvis did that evening wasn't just generous. It was transformative, creating ripples that would eventually produce one of the greatest voices in music history, Whitney Houston. It was during a late-night rehearsal at American Sound Studio in Memphis, 3 months before that fateful Las Vegas show. Elvis had been struggling with the emotional depth of "In the Ghetto," a song that demanded raw vulnerability he wasn't sure he could deliver. The session musicians had packed up and gone home hours ago, but Cissy Houston remained, quietly humming harmonies in the corner while organizing sheet music. The studio was dimly lit, filled with the lingering smoke of a dozen cigarettes and the echo of unfinished melodies. Elvis sat at the piano, playing the same chord progression over and over, searching for something he couldn't quite name. Then he heard it, a voice that seemed to carry the weight of every struggle, every hope, every prayer ever whispered in the darkness. Cissy was singing softly to herself, not performing but simply existing in the music. Her voice wrapped around the melody of "In the Ghetto" with such profound understanding that Elvis stopped playing. He turned to look at this woman he'd worked with for months, and for the first time, he truly heard her. Not as a backup singer, not as part of a group, but as an artist whose pain and truth cut straight to the soul. "Cissy," Elvis called out, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sing that again." She looked up, startled, clutching the sheet music to her chest. "Which part, Mr. Presley?" But Elvis was already walking toward her, his eyes bright with recognition. "All of it. Sing it like you just did, like you're living it." And she did. For the next 20 minutes, Cissy Houston filled that empty studio with a voice so powerful, so achingly beautiful, that Elvis knew he was witnessing something rare. This wasn't just talent. This was artistry being born. Over the following weeks, Elvis began asking questions. He learned about Cissy's life, the single motherhood, the financial struggles, the dreams deferred for survival. He discovered that she'd grown up singing in church, that her voice had been trained by gospel masters, and that she wrote songs in notebooks she kept hidden in her purse. He found out about 6-year-old Whitney, who could already carry a tune better than most adults, and about Cissy's secret hope that maybe, someday, she might step out of the shadows and into the light. The more Elvis learned, the more determined he became. This woman deserved more than backup vocals and session work. She deserved her moment. But it wasn't just about opportunity. Elvis recognized something deeper. In Cissy's voice, he heard the authentic emotion that his own music had been searching for. She had lived through struggles he'd only sung about. She carried the gospel truth that made his spiritual songs ring with conviction. Elvis made a decision that would change everything. He was going to give Cissy Houston the platform she deserved, and he was going to do it in a way that would be impossible to ignore. Las Vegas International Hotel, August 15, 1969. The showroom was electric with anticipation. Celebrities, high rollers, and devoted fans packed every table, their conversations creating a buzz that vibrated through the air. Elvis had already delivered his opening set with the magnetism that made him a legend. Blue suede shoes, Hound Dog, and Love Me Tender had the audience eating out of his hands. The Sweet Inspirations had provided their usual flawless harmonies, Cissy's voice soaring above the others in perfect support. But instead of taking his usual intermission, Elvis remained on stage. He adjusted his microphone, and the room gradually fell silent. "Ladies and gentlemen," Elvis began, his voice carrying that familiar mix of confidence and vulnerability that made him irresistible. "I want to tell you about someone special tonight, someone who's been making my music better for months, but who deserves to make her own music even better." The audience leaned forward, curious. Elvis turned toward the sweet inspirations, his eyes finding Cissy's. "Miss Cissy Houston, would you step forward, please?" Cissy's heart hammered against her chest. She looked at her fellow singers, who nodded encouragingly, then slowly walked to center stage, her sequined dress catching the lights. "This woman," Elvis continued, placing a gentle hand on Cissy's shoulder, "has one of the most beautiful voices God ever created. And tonight, she's not going to sing backup. Tonight, she's going to sing lead." He handed her his microphone, the weight of it feeling both familiar and foreign in her hands. The audience sat in respectful silence, sensing they were about to witness something extraordinary. Cissy looked out at the sea of faces, took a deep breath, and made a choice that would echo through music history. She was going to sing "Bridge Over Troubled Water," a song that wouldn't be released by Simon and Garfunkel for another 6 months, but one that had been circulating among musicians as a demo. As the first notes left her lips, something magical happened. The showroom transformed. This wasn't just a performance, it was a revelation. Cissy's voice soared through the lyrics about being a bridge over troubled water, about being there when times get rough, and every person in that room felt the weight of her truth. She wasn't just singing words, she was testifying. Her voice cracked with emotion on "I Will Lay Me Down," and the audience held its collective breath. When she reached the powerful climax, her voice filled every corner of the venue with such raw power that people began to weep. The silence that followed seemed to last forever. Then, slowly, one person began to clap, then another. Within seconds, the entire showroom erupted in a standing ovation that seemed to shake the building's foundation. Elvis stood beside Cissy, clapping as hard as anyone, tears streaming down his face. But he wasn't finished. As the applause continued, he pulled out an envelope from his jacket, an envelope that contained not just a recording contract he'd arranged with his label, but also a cashier's check for the down payment on her first house. "Miss Houston," he said, his voice carrying over the continuing applause, "your voice has been lifting me up for months. Tonight, it's time someone lifted you up too." The moment Cissy opened that envelope and saw what was inside, she broke down completely, not just from gratitude, but from the overwhelming realization that someone had truly seen her, truly believed in her potential. Elvis wrapped her in a bear hug as the audience continued their thunderous appreciation, and in that embrace, musical history was being written. This wasn't just about one generous gesture, it was about recognizing greatness and giving it the platform it deserved. The morning after that Las Vegas show, Cissy Houston woke up in her hotel room thinking she'd dreamed it all, but the envelope on her nightstand, the recording contract, and the messages from music executives who'd been in the audience proved it was real. Within weeks, she was in the studio recording her first solo album, her voice finally given the space it deserved to breathe and soar. The media coverage was extraordinary. Headlines like "Elvis Discovers Hidden Gem" and "The Backup Singer Who Stole the Show" appeared in newspapers across the country. But more than the publicity, it was Elvis's public endorsement that changed everything. When the king of rock and roll declared you worthy of stardom, the industry listened. Other artists began taking notice of their own backup singers in ways they never had before. The sweet inspirations, already respected, suddenly found themselves elevated to a new level of recognition. Record labels started crediting backup vocalists more prominently, and session musicians began receiving the acknowledgement they'd always deserved. Elvis had started a quiet revolution in how the music industry viewed its supporting players. But the most profound impact was on Cissy's family. With the financial stability Elvis had provided, she could afford better vocal training for Whitney, who was already showing signs of inheriting her mother's extraordinary gift. Whitney Houston was only 6 years old, but she remembered the night her mother came home from Las Vegas, glowing with excitement and possibility. Uncle Elvis, as Whitney came to call him, had given their family something more valuable than money. He'd given them hope and validation. Cissy used Elvis's gift to move her family to a better neighborhood, to invest in Whitney's musical education, and to pursue her own artistry with confidence she'd never felt before. The vocal coaching, the piano lessons, the exposure to professional musicians. All of it became possible because Elvis saw potential and chose to nurture it. The friendship between Elvis and Cissy continued until his death in 1977. She would later describe him as one of the most generous souls she'd ever known, someone who understood that true greatness meant lifting others up. On Elvis's birthday in 1976, Cissy performed at a small private gathering at Graceland, not as a backup singer, but as a featured artist singing her own material. The circle was complete. The woman who had once harmonized behind others was now commanding her own spotlight, her own respect, her own place in music history. When Whitney Houston eventually rose to become the best-selling female recording artist of all time, she would often tell the story of the night Elvis changed her mother's life. He didn't just see a backup singer, Whitney would say in interviews. He saw a woman, a mother, a dreamer who deserved her moment to shine, and because he believed in her, she learned to believe in herself, and in me. The influence wasn't just financial or professional, it was spiritual. Elvis had shown the Houston family that dreams were meant to be pursued, not just postponed. That voice, that gift, was meant to be shared with the world, not hidden in the shadows. 43 years later, when Whitney Houston became the most awarded female artist in Grammy history, she would dedicate her success to two people, her mother Cissy and Uncle Elvis, who had the wisdom to recognize greatness when he saw it. In interviews, Whitney would describe the ripple effects of that single night in Las Vegas, how it gave her mother the confidence to dream bigger, to invest in her daughter's future, and to understand that talent deserved to be celebrated, not hidden. That moment didn't just change one woman's trajectory, it altered the course of American music forever. The lesson of that night transcends music industry politics or celebrity generosity. It's about the profound impact of recognition, how seeing someone, truly seeing them, can unlock potential that might otherwise remain buried. Elvis Presley could have simply enjoyed Cissy Houston's backup vocals and moved on. Instead, he chose to use his platform to elevate someone else's dreams. He understood that true greatness isn't about standing alone in the spotlight, but about making sure others get their chance to shine just as brightly. That night in Las Vegas wasn't just about one generous gesture. It was about seeing the human being behind the harmony, the dreams behind the dedication, the potential behind the politeness. Elvis Presley didn't just give Cissy Houston a moment in the spotlight. He gave her family a foundation for musical greatness that would echo through generations. He showed the world that sometimes the most beautiful voices are the ones we haven't been listening to closely enough. Every backup singer, every supporting player, every person working behind the scenes has a story worth telling, a dream worth nurturing, a voice worth hearing. Who in your life deserves their moment to step into the spotlight? Sometimes the greatest gift we can give someone isn't money or fame. It's simply being seen, being valued, being believed in. Because you never know when that moment of recognition might plant the seeds for something extraordinary, something that will inspire the world for generations to come.